Welcome, Soren, to the podcast, Stories
Thank you
Unfolded.
very much.
I've done
Thanks for
already a
inviting
little,
me.
yeah. Well, I mean, your story is super inspiring, so I'm curious to get into this conversation with you. I did already a little bit of an intro before our talk, so people know already how we know each other and where this connection even comes from.
Right.
So before we jump into the topic, I'll just do some icebreakers that you can just like answer whatever comes into your mind. First of all, so people can place you a little bit in the world map. Where are you currently located?
Well, right now we're sitting in Santos, Brazil, and one of the best beaches that I know or places to live. So, Brazil, Santos, São Paulo. This is actually
Oh,
my home office, so it works well. You know, the pandemics gave us the chance to move out of the downtowns and sit at home.
perfect. So that already actually goes to the next question. You mentioned kind of this is your office and your home. What is your favorite morning routine?
Well, I usually do wake up about 7 o'clock in the morning. Not an early riser, never have been, except for when we had to go to school and whatnot. And then I go to the gym. So try to hit the gym 3 or 4 times a week. And then after coming back from the gym, cleaning up, of course, and then sitting down and trying to do client work. Lunch in the afternoon. Probably I've actually picked up swimming back up, and which is something I quit for a long time. So either take a jog, swim, and then a couple times a week try to do some outrigger canoe paddling with a six-man crew that I paddle with, and it's a good routine. The routine is not one that I would call a standard routine, since the work allows me to also pursue some of my interests, and that's a blessing. And I think if you can mix your work, your income with your interests, that's the best of both worlds.
For sure. Sounds like a good life work balance, right? Or what like in our I guess I can relate to that. It's like just it's just life, right? There's not work life balance, it's just life in general.
That's right.
Um
That's right. And
so another random question, what will one always find in your fridge?
you'll always find some yogurt, which is what I have for breakfast. And that's it's we're these days we're extremely conscious about what we're eating. Not crazy, go crazy, no gluten, none of that stuff. But as you realize that your performance, even sports wise, is important, you tend to take care of your health. And so you're always going to find enough to put a good salad together, fruit, and then some yogurt. Like I said, lots of water, and then again your varied beef, chicken, fish, and it works. So it's an extremely, I would say, regular fridge that has food for regular meals. Nothing fancy, and nothing that actually will stand out too much.
Sounds like a good balance.
It is. It is.
The last icebreaker, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good one. I used to say that when I was in what is now called the middle age, it would be fast as a bullet and invisible. Those things are, obviously something Superman has, and but I think it's superheroes are in vogue these days, and I think it's a little bit of flight, but that's okay. We all need heroes, and heroes are important. If you go back to Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss, and your icons, and you have to have heroes. I wouldn't say Superman is a hero, but if we're going to get into it later, he also grew up from parents from a different place, and actually carries with him some of the things that we might get into as we talk.
Cool. I'm curious that you integrate that later on the topic. So let's get into your story. First of all, if I would be meeting you for the first time, how would you describe yourself so that the audience know a little bit more about who you are, what you are, where you're coming from?
It's perfect. It's a perfect question, really, and it is a perfect icebreaker too. One of the most flattering descriptions I've heard, not from myself, but about myself, is that I'm an explorer and a writer. Now, that's flattering because it actually talks to one of some of the things I'd like to be, I guess. And as we remember, Maya, it's people see you in different roles at different times. And I think that's one of the multifaceted things that we as perhaps expat kids have is in fact everybody has is you appeal to different senses in different groups, and so people have a different perception of who you are depending on what you're doing. Uh, Personally, I would say that I'm curious and interested, because there's a difference between being curious and interested. You can be curious and never follow up, but the interested part is the one that drives most of what I do. Most of the reading, most of the exploring, most of the writing that I've done over the last couple of years. So I would say curious and interested, and depending on how you act or react to that, then we'd unfold the conversation in that direction.
Okay, so going on that, what are you more curious and interested about?
Well, I'm actually curious. Well, I'll give you a shorter version. If I were to go back and go to school again, I'd actually do some kind of anthropology and then social sciences. Perhaps because of my experience growing up, and we'll get to that in a minute. I'm curious as to the human condition and how that is affected with population movements. From way back, from the first guys that first left and said, "I wonder what's on the horizon," and took their family and kids, or just their 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 wife with them, and then that curiosity, it allows me not to stay at home, if you will. It gives me the ability to imagine what's beyond the horizon. So that has to do with history. That has to do with social sciences. It has to do with even art, and learning how to do watercolors. It's how do you express these experiences that you're taking in, much like a sieve. I see ourselves as sieves that we filter out the experiences as we move through time and space.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and I mean, that's already kind of a good connector to actually my next question, which is, I mean, you've gone a long way until this moment where we're now. I mean, you've been changing homes and countries from an early age on. Could you kind of go a little bit deeper into that and give the listeners a summarized background of your story of where you come from? Because I think that's very linked to what you said now, right? Like this curiosity and interest.
Absolutely. It's not a long story, but it's a good story. I was actually born in Denmark, and Denmark, as a 7-year-old, my father took the chance and took a job in Brazil, and this is and we moved down here. The family, my brother and my mom and my father was already here, and we moved to Brazil, to Santos, exactly where I'm sitting today, many years later, um, to in the shipping business, and thereby ends up meeting your grandfather, and then we've grown up ever since. We spent the next 10 years in Brazil. This is from 68 to 78, the miracle years in Brazil, and great youth, I would say. If you're alphabetized elsewhere, as we've talked about before, perhaps if you come to another country before you're 7 or so, was exactly 7. You actually have a chance of learning the languages fluently. And if you're alphabetized both in Portuguese, English, and Swiss or whatever, you end up with a set of tools that will actually help you for the rest of your life. At the end of in the middle of the 70s, there were some, there were some, let's put it this way, some difficulties in navigation or in shipping in Brazil, and the companies my father represented had to shut down due to some yeah, basically a monopoly. And we ended up, my father went to Abidjan on the Ivory Coast, and while we stayed here and visited him there. In '78, we moved to Houston, Texas, and Houston, Texas was a jungle. I mean, if people look at Brazil today and think we're walking around with, in the jungle
Monkeys and
here, I was going to say it, but and snakes on the street and
classic.
stuff. No, dancing samba every day, and so party in the streets, Lionel Richie style.
Naked.
It doesn't work, the real cultural shock came as we moved yeah, back to the first world, the real first world.
How
Texas in
old
the
were you then
'70s I
when you
was
moved to
17 at the time.
17?
So exactly, perhaps at another critical point in your growing up, because if that's when you'd rather not lose your friends, and that's what happens when you move. You end up having to create a new set of friends. The the funny thing about that is, we'll get to that later. Most of the friends we ended up meeting and making friends with were also expats or actually Americans that had grown up overseas, because you have this instant connection, having grown up in a different set of circumstances. Went to school, finished high school, university, MBA, got married, and ended up moving to Hawaii I think it was in '94, right after my father died. My father kept on traveling back to Mozambique, Portugal, and died at a very early age, at 59, in fact. And then after 5 years in Hawaii, I actually, and you never move back anywhere, as you well know, Maya. You move forward and came to Brazil after having been gone 21 years. And, um, and it was the right decision. It was, you'd say, well, why didn't you go back to Denmark? The fact is that I would consider Santos my home much more than Copenhagen, because this is where I grew up. This is where my formative years were. This is where not only my childhood but my my youth was here, and this is where the friendships that last forever were made. And so um, came back, and this was in '99, so 23 years ago, almost 24, in March, in fact. And then by extreme stroke of faith, uh, sustainability was starting at the time in Brazil, in the coffee business, in the business that most of my childhood friends were actually involved in. And the sustainability then gave me a leg up on everybody else, because that's what I've been doing in the U.S. for the last 20 years. And so sometimes it is good to move, but you have to have knowledge with you. Since then, I've spent many years in Nicaragua, working again in the coffee business, working on sustainability issues. They call them ESG today, but it's the same thing. It's doing the right thing, and so I would say that Santos, more than anything else, is probably my hometown, and it's been a long time coming, and I'm extremely at home here, and satisfied and happy. So that's a shorter version of a very long story.
No, but I mean, I think it gives already kind of a very good kind of context to where you're coming from, kind of. Just kind of going back a little bit, this jump that you've done from the US to here, you've told me a little bit about the story already, and I mean, from what we've talked about, you kind of really, I mean, you were married, you had a job in Hawaii, you had like this whole structure set there, and then from what I understood, you went to Brazil without actually knowing the sustainability part, right? It was kind of like, fuck this shit.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's right. Well, truthfully, I was married, surfing relatively large waves, and had what people would call living the dream. Uh, the real issue that perhaps we could explore today or some other time is what is that dream? Is it a dream that you've covered up? Is it a chameleon dream? Is it somebody else's dream? Or is it your dream? At some point in time, you have to look at yourself and say, this is beautiful, but this is not where I need to be. So I actually divorced my wife, very, very nice lady. You know, it's one of those things that it's a friendship you lose too, yeah, but that's part of life. Um, we learned a lot together. Got married relatively early, and it's I have zero regrets. It was the right thing. But like you said, Maya, I came to Brazil on some more common friends' suggestion, and stayed with them for a while, and had nothing. Had no money, had no job, had no housing. The uh, the joke is always, why didn't you come on an expat wage? Well, because I didn't. I had to leave at that point in time, and then the stroke of luck was that at that point in time, the skills I had, and mind you, necessity. Need is a wonderful thing. If you have need, you go look for the answer. It just dovetailed into actually becoming the sustainability pioneer in the Brazilian coffee business. Now, had I planned that, it wouldn't have worked. It would not have worked. It was just, let's jump. Your sister says dive, but let's dive into this and see what happens. But it was out of need. It was something that I had to do to get back to the person that I felt I was. And many people say that, oh, he's going through, middle-age craze. And middle-age craze is not, in your 50s. It's not. Middle age, if you live to 70, middle age is 35. So that's exactly when I came down here. I came down at 39, but that's when you realize that either you go on the track, that you're on the right track, and as I'm going to mention Joseph Campbell again, follow your bliss, or you have to follow your bliss, which is not the track you're on, and then you have to take the hard decision and let go, set sail, and let go, and that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Having, as we talked about, having been a stranger in a strange land, or a guest, I would say, everywhere, even in Denmark, you're a guest today because you're no more Dane than the man on the moon is today. You take strength from that, and you go, well, if I can, Frank Sinatra, if I can do it here, I can do it anywhere. And I think that's a message that needs to stay, is that if you've grown up with multiculturalism, that gives you the superpowers that Superman actually had. You're much more than just the guys that don't have two sets or three sets of cultures like yourself to lean on. So coming to Brazil was tough. The first couple of years were kung fu fighting. I mean, it was
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and then again, through friends can open doors for you, but you got to knock them down. You have to prove yourself much more than anyone else. And today I work for one of the largest coffee shops in the world, but it wasn't planned. It was like the Lady Godiva. If they're a saddle horse, get on it, because it's not going to come by twice. So
Yeah,
that's
I
a
have
long
a
story, and maybe
Yeah, a good friend of mine, he told me like a while ago, he said, you know, you have to throw yourself on the road and the road will show you the path. So it's kind of exactly like that. I mean, if you might not have the direct, like the direction, the exact directions, but once you throw yourself, things are going to start popping up and things are going to show
Well,
you
you
the
have
way.
to.
Yeah.
You have to, and you have to follow your intuition. That's one of the things
Mm,
that sometimes early on in your career or in your own life, you doubt your intuition, Maya, and you have to follow what you know because you know it. You
mm,
know what you're supposed to do, and but there are a bunch of rules and norms and parents and society that tells you no, that's not what you need. You need to be a lawyer, a doctor, engineer, and well, I am an engineer because of that, and another story I'll tell you later. But it it's but I don't advocate just going out there and not doing anything
mhm.
because that won't get you anywhere. So it's not just
Exactly.
peace and love, and you have to actually seek gainful employment at all times because
Mm,
your freedom comes from economic freedom first. You have to
mm,
have economic freedom, financial freedom, and that's why most of us had to go through engineering school and become engineers and work with hard
you need the
hats,
money. You
and
need the
then
money.
somehow it pays the bills, and it
Mm,
but yeah, it was a very fortunate moment in time that if I planned it, it wouldn't have worked.
very cool. So you mentioned Nicaragua as well, so I'm gonna dive a little bit into a side topic, which has a lot to do with what we've been talking. But you
Right.
recently wrote a book where you tell the story of your grandfather while paralleling your own experience searching for the routes you traveled from Denmark to Nicaragua, in the search actually for this better life. In your case, you actually found the better life in Santos afterwards. But
Right.
at the time, your grandfather was searching it in Nicaragua. You only made 100 copies of the book, and I actually posted some of it on my Instagram when while I was reading it. People were like, "Oh, where can I get this book?" And I was like, "No, you can't."
well, well, they
But
can.
you,
They can. I'd be glad to send them a PDF version. It's the but finish your question and I'll try to answer so I don't bulldoze
yeah.
whatever you're thinking.
So you gifted it to friends and family, and it is a very touching story, where especially your last words kind of touched me deeply because I can relate to them quite a lot. I'll read a section and an additional phrase that impacted me personally, and then we'll go from there. So
Sounds
it
good.
goes like this. At home everywhere, but rooted nowhere. We molded our own culture. We keep up with the ones we call our own and reach out to any of them and pick up where we left off so many years ago. With them, we can share experiences only understood by those who grew up as cattlings like we did. With them, we are at home. And later you wrote, in this brave new world, we are all immigrants looking for a place to call home. A lot of these things you actually mentioned already while telling your story, like how you reach out to friends in Santos when you came back, and how in Texas you kind of connected to other immigrants. But kind of, can you go a bit deeper into these thoughts and also explain to the audience the concept of the third culture kit?
Absolutely. It's something that is I've always felt it, Maya. I've always known that those who grew up away from their parents' cultures, but yet in at home in their parents' culture, had something special, and this superpower that we talked about. The When I say that in this brave new world, we're all immigrants looking for a home, a place to call home. I really mean that. It doesn't have to do with any specific group or anything like that. Yeah, I would even say that in the technological changes and things that are happening now, people stay behind. They look for home. In Portuguese, lar. The hearth. Being at home, and being at home is a very tribal thing. I very much believe in tribes. in the true sense of tribes, Maya, not to be confused with other things.
Mm.
And I consider ourselves, and you and I are part of the same tribe, in fact, and so are most of your friends, and perhaps many people listening to this podcast, a tribe of what would be then coined in the 50s, third culture kids, TCKs. This was really meant, it was a study done on Army brats who every second year they moved around to a new Army base. And didn't know anyone, but they were the same. You know, they fell in right away. And what I like to say is the tribe is something that you identify with. It's a group of people that has perhaps the same language, the same culture, and even some of the same history. And that does not depend on your ethnic origin or your religious origin, or political. It has to do with experiences. And I mentioned some of the things while we're coming along here so that we could have a fuller picture. That's how the Highlanders created their clans. They're not all the same, but they are the same. They have the same experience. They have the same kilt, the tartan. They identify themselves with each other. And most of my life, in these friends and groups and tribes that I talk about, you can go to Africa, spend time in Africa and sit down with whoever who has this experience, and you're at home with them. So if it's a Frenchman who grew up in a French school in Abidjan, you already know him. You know who he is because his mom may be Moroccan. His father may actually be Schweizerdeutsch, but the set of circumstances where you are, in a sense, in an international school with a bunch of kids who are in the same situation you are, in a country that's not their own but is their own. This is what I want to say. So you're never really an outsider, and we'll get to this later. But you are, and I learned this word again in Nicaragua in the book from Mrs. Bacon. You are an outlander, and there's a series on Netflix that talks about that. Doesn't mean you're an outsider. You just have more knowledge. You have more knowledge, and therefore you are interested in knowing more about, first of all, where you are. So you may actually speak Swahili on the street, with your friends. You may speak Swiss at home, and you may actually speak English at the school. So you already have three sets of
Culture,
fluent
actually, yeah.
cultures, and you know that culture is only fluency. You know that you're only fluent if you understand the culture, because otherwise you don't understand the words. And that's a huge mistake on fluent. Well, that's good, but do you understand the meaning, the full meaning of the word being spoken? So that's one of the. So you're not, and even
There's
even
so
when you
many
go back
thoughts, so many
to,
things.
yeah, no, this is one of my favorite subjects that few people really care to even talk about unless they have the common experience. What happens is this: your parents, or even your parents, they move someplace. Well, your father, he's taking care of business, so he's already involved in everything, but he doesn't know anything about where we are. Your mom and the kids, they got to figure out how to go, to the market, how to survive, how to call when you take the bus, how to get in school. So the kids, many times the kids become the parents because they're the ones that first, and I actually put that in the book with some of the Danes that went to Nicaragua. The children are the ones that picked up Spanish first. And they're the ones that have to then tell the parents how things work because they speak the language. They're fluent in that culture. So they aren't insiders when on the street. But yet they're looked at as an outsider because at home they have different foods, different clothing. They speak a different language to their parents. That when you're growing up, you might actually be somewhat embarrassed when your mom, talks to you in the store and you go, oh, "Shit,
What are you talking? I don't understand that language or something like
no,
that.
And then now it's, embarrassing me when, you're just a kid growing up
Yeah,
and
because as
I'm
a kid, you
taller than
just
you
want to
are.
fit in, right? Like you just want to be
Just
part
want to fit
of
in.
that community.
And
Yeah.
and the thing about that is like yourself, imagine me, 6'4", big tall blonde kid in Brazil. I only fit in the tribe that your parents were part of, the other expats, so be they Poles, British, German, and because that tribe had a common experience. And therefore, as you grow up into your teenage years, those are the people that you identify most. And therefore, I wrote that you keep up with them forever. You may not speak to them for years, but then when you pick up with them, well, you know who they are and you know their language. So, because you haven't grown up with uncles, cousins, anything, you have nothing. You're basically by yourself. So that becomes your family. That becomes your quote unquote tribe. And I dare say this because that tribe is strong, most of the people I know seek higher education. They seek to become the best because they know they are alone. They have no family to fall back on. They have no family business. They have, five generations going back on a farm. So they are this, and dangerous to say, they're the strength an immigrant brings to a new country. It is the need to survive and survive well because you're not going back anywhere. I love the quote that Cortez said when he came to the New World. He goes, "Burn the ships. We're not going back. We're not going back. This is where we are now." And so even this whole thing about, well, I'll go back to Denmark. No, you won't because you're a stranger in Denmark. I'll go
Yeah.
back to Switzerland. You tried it. Um, well, not really, but there are people in Switzerland, just like all my tennis friends in Texas. We were at home. They've grown up in Saudi, they've grown up in Singapore, they've grown up in Argentina, Spain and stuff, and we were the same. And it's funny, it looks like kind of a Breakfast Club movie. This is a movie in the 80s where, you have a bunch of misfits,
Different,
sitting,
like that.
apart, apart in the cafeteria. People go, man, who are these? But that's what I mean. I mean that even though these tribes stay together, and it takes a long time for them to disperse. They they're special, and they give each other strength. You know, it's not the original tribe. I'm no more Dane than anyone else, but I am. Because
Mm,
if you remember, up to 7 years old, that's when your soul is formed. And
mm,
from 7 to 17, that's the man. And from then on out, it's a professional. So I've had extreme luck in having a Danish upbringing with all the,
mm,
I would say the education that goes with this and the understanding, a Brazilian upbringing as a person, which allows me to be this mestizo that many
mm.
big companies look for, and then having an American education, an Anglo-Saxon work ethic
We got
that
that. Mm,
that makes you work. It's not just well, let's see what happens. No, you gotta make. So that's what I mean by even the most settled person today still has challenges um, on a daily basis that quote actually also fits. You're still looking for a place to call home. And since the 50s, we've had huge human migrations. The millions of people that moved through Europe a couple of years ago. The millions of people that go into North America. These people are living this today.
mm,
To be an immigrant anywhere, well, I know it's not fun. It doesn't have to be sad, but
No, it's difficult. I
but you
mean,
have it.
it's a growth path, right? Like it makes you, it transforms you into a chameleon. It makes you kind of start adapting to many different places,
Very,
right?
very well, very well. The chameleon word is one I use often. It is the motto. It is exactly what you are. You have the ability because of your various experiences to fit in everywhere. You
Mm-hmm.
actually do. You know, you play tennis, you surf, you do whatever. You have information on history, geography, politics. You can do whatever you want. You can sit down and talk to anybody,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're fluent in the languages. It's not so easy if you're not fluent. You got to admit that. Um, but on the other hand, as I wrote, you're not really rooted there either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're
Yeah, I think
not
yeah, it's
you're
interesting
rooted.
because for many years, like I kind of, I mean, I went to Switzerland and lived for a long time in Switzerland after being like growing up in Brazil. Um, but I always had the feeling that like I don't belong neither here nor there. But then with time is what you said, like I started to realize that the outsiders started creating an insiders group. So you start creating, as you said, right, like the group of expats or foreigners.
It is your tribe, and it is your Auslanda, and it's the in Danish it's udlænding, and that means because I don't think foreigner is not a good word. It is not
Mm,
translated well. Foreigner, you take it as somebody who is not connected. But an
mm.
outlander just means that you have a different history, but you're also here. You're
Yeah,
just from
that's a
some other
that's a
place.
good word. Yeah.
And I only realized that when I was sitting there and talking to Miss Bacon in Bluefields, name of the book, by the way, um, when she goes, then you'd have to read the book, but when she kind of longed to come back into
Mm,
this outlander uh, tribe after having been in Nicaragua, an Anglo-Saxon Nicaragua, for which few people know, but the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua obviously they were nothing more than banana republics, and much more influenced by the Caribbean than say the Spanish Pacific coast up to I'd say the 60s. And so they all spoke English, in Oxford English with a Jamaican lilt. And she goes, I wish we were outlanders again. And it struck me as something. I understood it right away, but it struck me as something funny for her to wish that her great grandchildren would once more be part of this wandering tribe, as we talked about. And I
mm,
understand why. And then that's why I used the word outsider. I feel is kind of like pushing somebody away or saying, no, you don't know anything. In fact, you know more about where you live than most people that you're around. Uh, my father used to say, know the country more than the locals because that's important. You have to know where you are, and and I live by that. So there's uh, there's strength in it. There's strength in it, and that's what the message, I guess, that I'd like to leave you and the listener is you're not lost. You're not absolutely not lost. You are the strongest person in the room at all times, because you
mm,
have three cultures, four cultures behind you, and everything that you are, you already know you are. It's your intuition. You already know it. So
mm.
don't by any means let any other person tell you what to do. Of course, good advice is always good, but it's free, right? Free is that's not worth it. But you, as you grow into yourself, as you did, uh, you know what you're supposed to do, and it's to get going. You can't sit around and wonder what's going to happen.
Mm,
As you mentioned, Maya, that was the best thing that happened to me in Brazil. there was no tomorrow. It's today. It's not what am I going to do in 10 years. It's how am I going to pay the bill today.
Mm.
And that took me out of a comfort zone that I'd been living in, and admittedly, for many years in Texas, where I'd fit in like the true chameleon, the cowboy hat, belt buckle, boots, and the whole shooting them.
And then went afterwards to the whole surfer life in Hawaii, and
and
then
well, in fact, that is funny you should mention that, but that's who I was growing up. So you come back and touch on some things that are in your very core, and you realize that those are the things that you're supposed to follow. It's not what what you're trying to be. It's who you are. And we've talked about this. Anderson has a wonderful fairy tale, H.C. Anderson, about the ugly duckling. The ugly duckling, it's fantastic. It's magic. The ugly duckling is picked up by a duck and raised as a duck. But it's not until he actually realizes that it's a swan, and the ugly duckling has known this all along. But how was the ugly duckling going to know? So you said about fitting in different clothes. You have different clothes. Growing up, where at home when you went back to your home country because you're wearing Brazilian clothes, then you come back from vacation, you're wearing European clothes. Wearing clogs before clogs were even seen anywhere. And people are going, what the
what
hell?
is that? Who
But
are
but
you?
but yeah, but you knew who you were. But you
Yeah.
knew who you were, and you tried. I went to school in Sao Paulo at Chapel, and I tell you what, it was a madhouse. I mean, if somebody from the outside
I would
walked in
go
there and
in
looked
there.
at
It's like, who are these people?
man, seriously, big bill bottoms and long hair and flowery shirts, and they go, cowboy hats, and I used to tell my brother, go, man, if I went with a leather hat on, nobody would say a word because they knew. So uh, the that is what I really talking about this outsider thing. It is at some point, and sooner than later, one would hope, somebody has to tell you what you are is perfect, but that's
Yeah, and
what you don't have
yeah, I think it needs
when you
also a
don't have
little bit of.
uncles, aunts, and stuff. You don't have anybody to say that, and then I think then you grow into your own skin, so to speak.
Mm.
I'll tell you a story that was told. Somebody told me the story in Africa when I was there about a family who actually shipwrecked on the coast of East Africa in this case. And this was back in 1800s, 1866. Um, British couple came ashore, desert beach, had to grow up for a while. There was no one there. So they thought. After a little while, the wife actually has a kid, John. And this is a story about John, really. Um, but they were actually trespassing on another tribe's land, and at some point it got ugly. And before that, the mom had died of malaria, and in some dispute, the father actually got killed by the leader of this tribe, which left little John, 1-year-old John, basically as an orphan. But the leader, I think his name was Kerbach, actually. Uh, Kala, his sister, had just lost a child and raised John as hers. He grew up as an African. He grew up speaking their language and learning their ways, and he was one of them. So, but he wasn't. Well, he knew that somehow. That he wasn't. And then by chance, he stumbles across their old cabin where the parents had lived, on the beach there, and actually sees pictures of himself as a child, and books and whatnot, and, and this is funny because I learned to read Danish through picture books. So I read Danish, read, speak, and write, and he teaches himself to read, not speak, because speaking you have to hear the language. So he reads all his father's books and whatnot, and actually geography and whatnot, and realizes that's him. Yeah, but where are these people? It's not, it was not with him. But he knows that he's more than, or he also has another culture that is his. I think you know where I'm going with this, but when he's
I'll
about
let you
18 or
finish
so,
it.
yeah, about 18 or so, he meets a very nice, also a young lady who's also shipwrecked by chance on the same coast with her father and the expedition, and the porters, and and they hit it off right off the bat. So he writes her, I can't speak your language, but if you teach me, I'd love to learn it. And he learns it right away because he knows the words. So he just needs to, and as you know, because you speak several languages, it's a mouth. It's if you don't have the sound in your mouth, you can't say the word. So you can't say son. Son is my name in Danish. You can't say it. You can say Soren. You can say a bunch of things, but you can't say son. And so they grew up. For a while there, and then finally, my father gets rescued, and she moves back to the U.S. And of course, he's very sad. But years later, he goes and finds her. He leaves his tribe, his homeland, and goes and finds her. And then they go back, and he goes back to England, claims his ancestral heritage, and they live as Earl and Lady Greystoke. And so he actually has a much larger heritage than he would have imagined. They have a kid. And this kid, ironically, takes a name from his African tribe. So he takes a name that actually means killer, which Korak, which is a strange thing. Why would the child, this second generation, third culture kid, actually go back to where the parents knew each other? And this kind of reminds me of your parents a little bit, from two different cultures, but growing up together. Why would he choose another culture and not the one he was born in? Well, finally, like many of us, the couple and the son, they moved back to Africa, and the rest of the story goes there. Now, the trick to that story and is, of course, that's not my story. It's it is actually the story of Tarzan. Lord Greystoke, which very well written. It's Edgar Rice Burroughs. He borrows a story from a real event to tell a story about this couple of third culture kids. I love it because it rings true. It talks about the smaller job you're in, that you go and pick up perhaps a lost love, or somebody who was very important to
Connects you
you,
to
and
another one. Yeah.
because it's where you grew up and you have a common story and a common interest, and you actually choose. This is the important part, to have children with them. Very important part. Who are you going to have kids with? People who are like you. It's
Yeah, I
true.
think we've
So
we've talked a little bit about it as well, right? It's hard to relate to someone that doesn't understand where you're coming from, right?
So, just an end note to that thing there. If it's Lord Greystoke, Tarzan, not the apes, you go, well, you tricked me into saying there was a tribe. Well, it was an ape tribe for sure, but it's a tribe nonetheless, and they grew up in a social setting that talks to this chameleon-like thing.
Mm.
Now you're gonna go, well, man, I'm 100% crazy, maybe, but I tell you what, 21 years after I left Brazil, I also came back, and today I've been married to somebody who was extremely important to me in my youth, and that I was passionate and loved dearly, and we've been together for 23 years. So, maybe it's not all that crazy. Maybe you actually have to listen. The music says listen to your heart, but do it. And
Mm.
one of the things uh, that I usually tell people is that even if a person was very important to you, say it, say it. Tell them that it is an important thing for you to tell someone. Listen, be they just a friend or not, you have made a huge difference in my life, and you were a role model. Say it while they're alive. So that's a
So
very
you
long
found your
story.
Jane.
Absolutely, absolutely. Or Superman's intrepid reporter. So, but these are human stories.
Mm.
These are human stories. They're not necessarily, let's put it this way, these tribal stories, but they are. They are. They're you look for someone who shares your interest. I don't think opposites attract.
Mm.
No, likes attract. Likes attract because and then we can go into Richard Dawkins, a whole bunch of other authors that say you actually seek who you see in the mirror and who you
Mm.
grew up with. So yeah, I think that's
A
one of
lot
the
of
things.
info to take in there. But
Yeah,
also,
well, there's a whole other story there.
yeah, for sure.
But
We can do another episode on it.
if somebody cares to listen, I'd be glad to. But yeah, this whole Outlander thing is interesting. I think more and more we'll see this kind of understanding because immigration is at a peak. People don't immigrate because they want to. They immigrate because there's either a gun to their head or their child is hungry. And
Mm.
otherwise, you would actually stay put. Now, is there a small percentage of us who are adventuresome, want to go out and see the world and whatnot? Yeah, there is. But I tell you what, in the end, they would rather go home. And I'm gonna read a passage from a book that a friend of mine sent. He's 80 years old. He was actually my parents' friend, and he also was one of the 100 friends that got a hard copy there. And he sent me his book. So he raised two kids in the U.S. and this is what it says. Just bear with me. My adventurous spirit from when I was quite young continued up through life and has made it an exciting life with many incredible experiences. I've seen a lot of the world, a large part of the time because it became a large part at a time because it became popular to travel at the time. Looking back now, yes, there are things I would have liked to have done differently, both privately and career wise. I should have spent more time with my family, especially Michelle and Andrew, who would be the couple friends or the kids. Not having grown up in the US and thus having a deeper knowledge and understanding of both the most popular American sports, baseball, football, basketball, and also the schooling system, would not only have brought more common interests with Andrew and us closer during the critical teenage period. As the children approach high school and college, we could, if we had had our own experience to draw on, have been of a greater help. I think that's not a regret of an old man that's dying. That's fact. That's what we said about talked about earlier. You know, be careful what you think your kids know and don't know, because they don't know. They have to figure it out themselves.
Mm.
And the parents, they can't give you any advice because they didn't grow up there.
They don't know
And
either. Yeah.
that to sum things up, I think, gives what we're calling TCK kids all the strength in the world. They are by themselves. Yet, at home, they're either in Switzerland or in London, or in my case, in Copenhagen. They speak their parents. I speak my parents' Danish. So when I go to Denmark, they
It's
go,
not the local,
how,
normal,
how nice.
daily.
It's, that's a
It's an
very pretty
archaic.
Danish. Where'd you pick up that old fashioned stuff? But it's, it's just the King's Danish or the Queen's Danish in this case. And but you even know more about, the Danish culture than they do, because they grew up there. They're in the nest and you're not. So, I've actually, I give congrats to everybody who's grown up like this, and most of them are very successful. Most of the friends that are finance people in New York. When you have a cousin, in fact, who's doing really well up there. In Australia, your own sister. People, they thrive to succeed because they have to, and because it's satisfying. It's not because anybody's telling you to. It's satisfying, and at the end, they're looking for that home that we are looking for. And I think I try to tell my grandfather's story to get to that point. If you're a farmer and you don't have land, you have to find land. And land is fertility. So if you're looking for any financial success, land might give you that. This is a dangerous step to take, but you also may find somebody to create a family with on that land. So land and human fertility is eternal search. Yeah, I'm certain. And in this tribe that you and I belong to, do it well. And I really, my hat's off to everyone who can identify with this. And if they've never heard anything about it before, start thinking about it, because you're the greatest. You're the greatest. Borrow, use all the tools you have. They're not useless. Use all of them, all your languages. Apply at the biggest companies you can find, even if it's just to be a translator. Do it, because as you said, the road will lead you the way. You will get to where you need to go.
Yeah, and what a friend also told me recently, it's that we're Swiss knives. We have all of the tools that we want in one little place, and we can just kind of
and the thick
what
one,
we want
the
where.
very thick one, not
Yeah,
the little
exactly.
thin one. The
No, the big one with our names engraved on it.
Exactly.
That's also a
It's
good
true.
analogy. Yeah.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one. But take the Tarzan in. It's
And
a fun
Mowgli.
story because
I think Mowgli also goes in the same. Yeah.
it's they're all the same. And Rudyard Kipling, he was actually an expat, right? He's a third culture kid.
I really.
Grew up in India of British parents, so he knew exactly what he was writing. He knew exactly what he was writing. If you look at Mowgli again, in the Jungle Book is what it goes as, but what does he end up being? He ends up being the guy that can talk both the animal's language and the human's language,
Exactly.
and therefore settles the dispute about the forest.
And he has such a
Fantastic.
diverse group of friends, what we're talking about as well, right? Like there's the panther, there's
Exactly.
the snake, there's the bear, there's everything. Like there's one of each in this mixed group of
Yeah.
people, of not people, but
Perfect. Tarzan the same, he speaks gorilla, he speaks panther, he speaks lion. But
exactly.
the thing about that is what you know too is that those of us who have two or three languages under our belt, it is much easier to pick up another one because you have points to borrow from, and you actually have a mouth formed from childhood that will allow you to pronounce a decent French,
Mm,
not fluent, but decent,
got you, yeah.
and and understand the words because it's a Romance language, so you have your Portuguese to borrow from, and
Mm,
that's why yeah, the Jungle Book exactly. He is
mhm.
the ambassador, and but there's none better. This is regardless of politics, and that's Obama. There's none better, none better. Regardless of politics, regardless of what you think of him, he's an African, well, a mixed couple kid growing up in Indonesia and then
Mm,
raised in Hawaii with
yeah,
divorced parents even. When and that gave him the ability to be president of the United States. Um, you
yeah,
know,
no, it's super powerful, yeah.
he no, he's king, man. He's king,
Mm,
and you can tell it when he speaks. Of course, he's a perfect politician, no doubt about it.
mm,
But I have extreme respect for the career and the path he took to actually step into the most powerful office in the
mm,
universe.
yeah. Yeah,
Right?
no, for sure. It's really respectable.
So, and even if you read Michelle's book, you know that he wasn't seen as a Black American. He was
Mm,
some stranger in the nest too.
mm.
But he
Yeah, he
reached.
made his way and he fought and he went through everything, right? No, it's super.
So that's a story that we can keep on talking about for many hours and days. And but I think your listeners, I think they got
There's a lot
the
of
gist of
info
it.
to process. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the ones that know the concept, they have something to reflect on it. It's always a good reminder. And the ones that don't know, I think have a lot to process and yeah, reflect on.
Well,
Um
we turned on the light. So if again, if somebody you got my social media there, you can put somewhere, and it's anybody care to is interested in furthering the conversation, and if somebody really cares to read the book, there's a PDF version I can send them, so I can send you, and you can pass them on.
Perfect.
Uh, the reason for the 100 books, Maya, is this: don't be so presumptuous that people really want to know your story. That's kind of a standard European mom's version of reality. Easy, take it
So
easy.
keep low, keep it low.
Cool, be cool. And your stuff is not that great, but it is. And
It is,
the
it
story
really is.
I care to write, I wrote my grandfather's story because it was a gift. Having followed his story, as a young man, trying to immigrate, trying to find land and fertility, if you will,
Mm,
and going back to the family farms all the way back to the 1600s, gave me a sense, a greater sense of who I am.
mm.
I
Yeah,
already knew it, but I saw it,
yeah, I went deeper.
and that's the whole thing about you think you're going crazy, but you're not. You just need to find connect the points. You and I said, I talked about this before we came on. Uh, you know, talk to someone who understands you.
Mm,
Yeah, Jungian therapy, it's all great. It's all great. But if you don't understand where you come from, don't go to therapy. Talk to
mm.
Maya. I'm serious
Hey,
because you
I'm
have
here,
to talk to
open
your
channel.
because it has to be somebody who has experience and can
Yeah.
say, yeah, I know where you're coming from. And yeah, I thought I was going crazy for a long time. like you said, didn't fit in. Of course, they don't fit in. How are you going to fit in, a square peg in a round hole?
Mm.
Nah.
And
So,
I think it's also the
but
patience to know that eventually also things will make sense, right? Like sometimes we get in that agony of like, what is this? It doesn't make sense. What's happening? But then afterwards, if you give it some time, you look back and you're like, oh, that's why.
But I challenge people to go out and do it soon. Do it soon
Mm,
because time is priceless. Do it
yeah,
sooner than later,
for sure.
and and be happy, please. Be happy.
Mm,
It's if just I think that's the message we're trying to send across here. We talked about a lot of things and a lot of stuff to chew on there, but know that if somebody goes, man, I identify with that, I can relate to that. Well, then start looking at it. It Clark Kent. It's go in there and the phone booth, and yeah, you are Superman, but you
mm.
got to take your reporter clothes off. So. Uh,
Yeah.
and
No, I,
then man, just knock it out. Knock the doors down. Become a badass Viking, pirate, whatever. Just do what you have to do to make this time worth
find the best version
living.
of yourself and enjoy it, right?
Absolutely,
Mm,
and that's why I read, my friend's quote because when he's sitting there almost at the end of his life, he's going,
mm,
yeah, yeah,
thank
I
you.
do have some regrets,
Mm,
man. I'll live
yeah.
for that. So I hope we've touched on some subjects here that
For sure. I think
that
there's
are
a lot. I
interesting at
mean,
least.
one of my last questions are normally if you could give one advice to your younger self, what it would it be? I mean, you gave a lot of advices, but if there would be like one that if you would look at your younger self, what would you say? Like just one phrase, what would it be?
Yeah, just follow your bliss, follow your intuition. You already know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, cool.
You know
Cool.
what you're
That's
supposed to do, and
a beautiful that.
and it comes from generations of knowing what you're supposed to do. And then I'm a firm believer in that most of the information you have with you from birth uh, is is uh, is genetic memory, and that's a whole different story. But you don't come unprepared. You already are prepared.
Yeah.
And
Trust
just
it,
on
right?
that note,
Just trust it.
trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. That would be my advice, and
Cool.
it, uh, it'll make all the difference. So
Mm,
that's what I
cool.
know.
Thank you so
As
much.
they say in Texas, yeah, as they say in Texas, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's a great story and keep sticking to it.
Yeah,
No, that's
that's
awesome.
great.
Thank you so much. I'll leave like your social media, website, email, everything on the show notes so people can
Yeah,
contact you if they want
sure.
to.
I'll send you the
And
PDF, and then if somebody asks you, it's my gift. It's my gift.
thank you.
I think storytelling is a great thing. I think we need more storytelling, and we need to talk. We need to talk more than screen.
Mm,
Screen is actually taking up a lot of time,
yeah, for
and I
sure.
think we need to go back to that tribe and tell the tribal stories,
Thank you for sharing
which
your
which
story
might
here.
be the next book, by the way.
Oh, looking forward to it.
So
Perfect.
yeah,
So you have already the next project coming up. That's great. So I'll definitely
something like that.
read that one as well.
We'll probably call them tribal tales, but that's TAILS. So that the Jungle Book and everybody else is in there instead of
Yeah,
tales and TALES,
I
which
like that. So are you
yeah, it'll be
writing already?
fun.
Are you already in the process of writing or?
It's not in the process. I actually I have a kind of a creative process that before I ever sit down and write anything, I digest it first. It's
Mm,
kind of funny. It'll take me a long time to before I actually start hitting the
just
keynote
fill it
speaker.
out.
Yeah, and once you start, then there's no stopping, and that's really the problem with writing. It's the challenge is once you get going, you can never stop. You have to, it's like work, and you have to consider it as work. You have to write every day, even if it's 2 paragraphs, write it. And even if it never gets printed, because as you know, writing is actually editing. So you have to have a lot of stuff so you can edit it away. And yeah, there's perhaps because of our conversation, I've started thinking about an old project that it was called, they're called Tribal Voices, actually, but Tribal Tales were just as good. And maybe even borrowing short stories from people like yourself, make it a collection of stories that could be put together as a collection of stories that not necessarily were mine, but follow a trend. Because uh, because they're there, the stories are there, and they're great stories. They're great stories. We could we could mention friends here that have horrible, fantastic multi-kid
Everything
stories,
different.
and
Yeah.
you go,
Yeah, there's so
and they're
much.
all good. They're all good. And
That's
and
true.
what you see is uh, you see a lot of artistic expression too. A lot of your friends, they have a lot of things they want to show, be it through paint, be it through art, be it through writing song, and I think that's part of this uh, of this
It's a
gift.
way of expressing, right? Like, because you have so many,
Gift,
you've experienced so much, you have so many feelings that you kind of want to start putting it out in a way, right?
and a lot of it is really, really good. Really good. And so,
Mm.
so that follow your bliss. I mean, it's George Campbell's, Joseph Campbell's line, but
You'll make it your
trust
own
yourself.
as well. Cool. Thank you
Correct.
so much. And I look forward to your next book. And we'll
That's
definitely be
right.
in touch.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure
Thank you,
being here.
Soren.
You
Bye.
bet.